One of the popular data formats that is emerging these days is JSON format. Because of JSON's nested hierarchical structure and schema-less nature, working with JSON data has always been a challenge. With Exploratory, you can work with various types of JSON data very easily. Here's how. You can select Import File Data from Data Frame menu and select JSON data in the pop-up, and select the JSON file. In this example, I'm selecting Yelp Business Review data. Once the data is imported, you can see that tree hierarchy of the data structure at the left-hand side and the preview data at the right-hand side. You can select which columns to bring in by clicking on the column header in the preview area. But because it's much easier to do so in Exploratory's command UI, I'm going to bring all the columns this time. Hit Run button to import into a data frame. Now you can see the summary information about the data at a glance. As you can see, there are a bunch of columns whose names are starting with hours. And let's say we are not interested in these columns. We can use select operation to drop these columns. Instead of selecting the column one by one, we can use convenient function called starts with and type hours and hit Run button. This has just deleted or dropped 14 columns. We can do the same thing for the columns whose names are starting with attribute. And lastly, we can remove this encrypted business_ID column by simply selecting that column name. Now we have only 12 columns. That's a huge reduction from the original 105 columns in a simple 3 steps. Now we can quickly visualize the data by using bar chart and see which states have the most businesses in this data. Or since there are longitude, latitude information, we can visualize their locations with map as well. Now, one of the challenges with JSON data is the array data. Those are presented as list column here. For example, this neighborhood column is registered as a list, which means there can be multiple entries of the neighborhood names. Let's find out if there are really multiple entries, and if there is, how many of those. Well, we can select Count Items operation from the column header menu. This will create mutate step with list_n function, which calculates number of the entries inside the list for each row. Once we run, we can go to Viz view and use pivot table to see number of the businesses by number of the neighborhood entries. We can quickly filter the data to see only the businesses who have 3 neighborhood entries. Now let's say we want to extract only the first entry from the list. We can select Extract an Item operation from the column header menu. This will populate list_extract function, and we can set the position. In this case, that is 1. Now we can see a new column created with the first entry from the neighborhood list for each business. Now there is another column that is registered as a list. That is categories column. As you imagine, most of the businesses would have multiple categories. For example, this restaurant can be Italian or pizza category, or simply restaurant category. Let's say we're interested in the restaurant business. We can use detect the text pattern operation from the column header menu. This will create mutate step with str_detect function. We can type restaurant as the text to detect, and this function would return true if it finds the matching text, otherwise false. We can quickly go to summary view and see how many are true. Notice that there is a step at the 2 steps before where we filter to keep the businesses with 3 neighborhood entries. We can remove the step and see the updated data. Now we can see 21,892 true, which means a restaurant. And we can change the column name to make it easier to understand. Now, if we want to work on only the restaurant business data, we can filter to keep only true value for this column. As you can see in table view, all the rows are now including restaurants text under categories column. Now, let's say we want to answer a question like how many pizza restaurants or what are the most popular categories. These sound super simple. But if the categories are nested inside list, it's not easy to do. So we can unnest, which means take each of the entries from the list and present each entry into each row. This is actually easier to see than talking. We can select Unnest from the column header menu and click Run. As you can see, for example, Emily's Lounge is repeated 5 times. That's because it has 5 different category entries. Now we can go to Summary View and quickly see what are the most frequent categories. We can see Restaurant is the most frequent, which is kind of expected because every business at this point is restaurant. So we can remove this entry with filter command. Now we can see fast food, pizza, Mexican are the top 3 most frequent restaurant categories. We can quickly go to visualization view and see all the categories in a bar chart and sort by number of the rows, in this case, number of the restaurants.